Welcome to the Robert Wenzel Show. Please stand by for Robert Wenzel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Robert Wenzel Show. I'm Robert Wenzel. Today, my guest is Lew Rockwell, who is probably the most important living advocate of liberty. He is the founder of the Ludwig von Mises Institute and the editor of LewRockwell.com, a daily Monday through Saturday collection of the most important commentary about current events from a libertarian perspective. Lew Rockwell is the great libertarian entrepreneur who has kept the names of Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard alive for us all. So, Lew, welcome to the show.
Bob, great to be with you. I'm a big fan of your website, as you know, and I think of it as a rocket. You know, it's difficult enough these days on the web, given the size of the internet, to stay even. I mean, so many sites are coming online every day. Everything is growing so massively that just to stay even, you have to run pretty hard. And what you've done over the last few years to take this site to right near the top, I mean, it's quite extraordinary. You deserve congratulations, and of course, wonderful that you have your radio show as well. But I'm a big fan of your website. I look at it first thing every day and look at it several times during the day, and I know that I'm one of only many, many people who do the same.
Thanks, Lew. I really appreciate that.
Your subscription commentary on the economy and investments and so forth is superb as well. So I want to urge everybody, if they don't get it, they should get it.
That's really important to mention that. It's the EPJ Daily Alert, which you can find at my website, economicpolicyjournal.com. And there's a logo there which will take you right to the information about the service and how you can sign up for it. So, Lew, I appreciate your mentioning that. Let's get right to it. I guess we have to talk about it. The Republican National Convention is coming up in a couple of days here. Is there any reason at all that libertarians should even pay attention to this thing, or what's your thinking there?
One reason that you pointed out, maybe they're going to be blown away by a hurricane, so that would be interesting. So that's something to keep our eye on. But, you know, I think it's like any Republican convention, and I have been to a couple of them myself, I'm sorry to say. Actually, I must say I enjoyed the Goldwater one. And I always remember when we're talking about civility and politeness and so forth, that everybody booed Nelson Rockefeller through his entire presentation, so he couldn't even be heard in the hall. It was only that it was recorded directly on the microphone that people could hear it on television, but in the hall, nobody could hear him. So that was a great high point of the convention. So these things are big parties. There's, of course, there are big corporations put on big events. The booze flows endlessly, and of course, it's the highest quality booze. There's a tremendous number of hors d'oeuvres. There are many working girls at these things. So the conventioneers, creeps and crooks that they are, all have a great time, and it's an assembly of bad guys. Once in a while, there's somebody good, but especially as the conventions have become just coronations, and there's no struggle at all in the Goldwater 64 at the Cow Palace, because it was a big fight over who was going to get the nomination. That sort of thing has long been ended by the Republican Party, and for that matter, the Democrats. They don't want that kind of struggle. They want a coronation where everything is focused on the greatness of Obama or Romney in the Republicans' case. And so all dissent is to be suppressed. These people are to be heralded as the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's all controlled, it's all choreographed, and it's all awful and also very boring.
Are you actually going to be there for the convention?
I'm going to be speaking at two pre-convention events. I'm going to be speaking at Paul Fest, which is a grassroots event involving many speakers and many bands at the Florida State Fairgrounds. And then on Sunday, I'll be speaking at Ron Paul's rally, which takes place at the University of South Florida's basketball arena. And I'm told it's already sold out. And I know there are like 200 press agencies who are going to be there, TV people, and all hoping, of course, for trouble. They're hoping for something interesting to be said or to happen, since everything else is so boring. I mean, it's just everything else is boring. But I will not be at the convention itself, I'm glad to say.
Now, can we expect anything from the Ron Paul delegates at the convention, or?
Who knows? I mean, one hears different things. reading comments from various people who say they're delegates. They point out that they're responsible not to any campaign, not even to a candidate, but to the people who sent them as delegates, people from their states, and that they made a pledge they were going to attempt to nominate Ron Paul and certainly to vote for him. My guess is there could be some interesting things that will take place. The Romney people, of course, are very focused on not a discouraging word being said, as he's hailed as the greatest guy ever since McCain. And
Right.
I notice other people, since signs are forbidden, unless it's a Romney Ryan sign. I notice various Paul people saying, well, they're making signs, they're going to roll them up and put them inside their pant leg. And then when it comes time, pull it out. And I guess that would be considered an extremely subversive act to unfurl a Ron Paul sign. So we have to see what's going to happen. I don't know. Much of this is not going to be televised this year, I guess, unless maybe C-SPAN will have the entire thing, or PBS. And most of it, of course, is not worth watching. Some of these guys are very interesting orators. Chris Christie, who's, of course, a monster, but he's an interesting speaker, will, I'm sure, give an interesting speech, but it's just Republican propaganda. The evil of Obama, why he's actually running a deficit and he's spending a lot, and that kind of stuff. versus, of course, the great Bush,
Right.
Or he's cutting the military. Oh no, the empire is threatened, as if only. Meanwhile, they'll be murmuring that he's a secret Muslim or whatever. My own view is I wish he were a secret Muslim. I think we'd probably be better off.
What do you read into Romney's pick of Paul Ryan as the vice presidential candidate? It looks to me like they might be a little bit concerned about the Ron Paul people, and so they throw Ryan out as this supposed Randian and Hayekian and all that kind of nonsense.
Well, he's. I think it's true. Certainly, Romney is aware that he needs all the factions within the Republican Party to back him, and he wants the Paulians, and this is the one group that's holding back. And so I think they picked, Ryan, who's the phony Ron Paul. He's even called Paul. I mean, he talks about. He sounds like, if you're just sort of not listening too carefully, he might fool you. You might think he sounds like Ron Paul, even though, as of course you pointed out, his voting record is horrendous. He's for every kind of bank bailout, GM bailout, Medicare Part D, and all the big deficits. I mean, he voted for everything bad under the Republicans and much bad under the Democrats. He's a big government guy. It came out in the WikiLeaks document dump that he was in secret communications with Bernanke and was like a Bernanke representative in the Congress. Shows he's a very important guy, of course, that he would be chosen for something like that. And of course, he was a big advocate of TARP and all bankster bailouts. But his rhetoric sounds Paulian, again, if you're not listening too carefully. So yeah, I think so. He's a very well-connected guy. His family connections with the Romney family back when they were when he was governor of Massachusetts, maybe in some crooked financial deals, certainly some big financial deals anyway, involving Bain and Ryan's brother. Ryan is a very important guy, and of course, as we also learn, he was put over the top for Romney when David Koch offered a $100 million donation to Romney at Koch's mansion on the Long Island coast. If only he would pick Ryan, $100 million given to various Romney super PACs and otherwise spent on the Romney campaign. So now just in case anybody's wondering what's the price of getting a vice president, that's at least at the current time $100 million. So Romney obviously serves the oligarchs, whether it's the Fed or whether it's the Kochs or other powerful interests. But he's effective. He's a little bit like Reagan in the sense that he sounds like a very different kind of a guy. He's a nice-looking guy. He's tall, slim, in great shape, and so forth, and very energetic and persuasive. People, the Republicans, all love him. And if they had any doubts about Romney, and of course many of them did have many doubts about Romney, they are heralding now the Romney-Ryan ticket. So I would say, as far as the Republican base anyway, it had a very good effect. We'll have to see what happens in the general, but Ryan helps Romney to try. He wants to keep of course, the whole discussion on the economy. He doesn't want to talk about abortion or whatever, things that could have come up recently. He wants only to talk about the economy. And he hoped that Ryan would do that. And also, Ryan was obviously approved by the power elite as a potential president if something happens to Romney, which is they always talk about, boy, you got to have a vice president who's capable of assuming the presidency. But what they actually mean is who's been approved by the oligarchy as a potential president. That's the actual test that has to be passed. So we know Ryan passed that test, just as Joe Biden passed that test. So, but I don't think people are going to be fooled. The Paulians are not going to be fooled. I think the Paulians see right through Paul Ryan just like they see through Mitt Romney.
Interesting. All right. So let's move on a little bit now past the convention. And, Ron Paul has done great things as far as bringing focus on liberty and what liberty really means. How do you see the movement going on from here?
Well, I think it's going to be a big improvement because I think that, and I always exempt Ron Paul personally from my analysis here for the reason I'm going to say, but I think politics is a snare and a delusion. I think that it is wrong to be focused on politics. As if our salvation could ever come from the state in any form, as if electing, some A versus B is going to make any difference. So I think for people to be focused on elections, focused on politics, focused on becoming part of the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, or for that matter, the Libertarian Party, I think is a mistake. The reason Ron's been different is maybe not uniquely, but almost uniquely, he's not power mad. I mean, he doesn't have what St. Augustine called the libido dominandi, the lust to rule, the lust to dominate.
Lew, that is absolutely true. I think he could have been fighting for delegates and fighting Romney right up to the last minute. It's evident that the man has no desire for power. He's not hungry for power at all. Not power hungry.
No. What he used politics for was not the normal thing of, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and I'll vote for your bill, you vote for mine, and I'll help you with your pork barrel project, and you help me with mine, and I'll vote for your war, you vote for my war, and all the sorts of stuff that goes on normally in the House of Representatives. He's never been part of that. He's used politics, he's used his campaigns, congressional, senatorial, presidential, as a way to spread the word about Austrian economics, about liberty, about central banking, about war and peace, about all the issues that are close to his heart. He's been so effective in promoting. So I think not only is the movement going to march on, and I would say freed from any taint of politics, is going to be a very good thing, but also he himself is going to continue to be extremely active. He's just not going to be part of politics. He's got some very great plans for after January 3rd when he's out of Congress, and working on various books, and he's various organizational things too that he wants, again, to promote the things that he cares most about, which again are central banking, sound money, sound banking, ending the Fed, and Austrian economics, and war and peace. So I think it's good news that the political phase is over.
Okay, great. That's great news, and I'm in sync with you there. The farther away we get from everyday politics and all that, the better is my view.
Well, it's really so corrupt. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been involved in politics. Before going straight, I used to be involved in politics, but it really is it's a criminal enterprise. It's also part of the government. You can't take over the Republican Party any more than you can take over the Justice Department. I mean, it's part of the government, and also you can't look to the Justice Department or the HUD or the Pentagon or the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or whatever to fix things. I mean, there's a loci of evil.
Right. The farther away we are from that, the better, because in my view, there's just no way that anybody can really run for office and get elected without having to cut deals here and there, and then you're on the slippery slope, and it's a whole other world.
Yeah, and there's also, of course, power. Power is a temptation, and I only ever felt it once myself when I worked for somebody who was running for governor of New York, and if he had been elected, I would have been a big cheese in the governor's office, and all of a sudden, everybody's salaaming you, and you can all of a sudden see the vistas that would be open before you, and I quit, right? I mean, because I didn't want to. It's a slightly scary thing too. I mean, you don't want to be involved in it. And it's just bad stuff. I mean, it's like, the devil taking Jesus to the top of the mountain and showing him all the kingdoms of the world and saying, I can give you these. Because, of course, he could give them to him because they were in his power. And my guess is the devil is still running all these governments. So, no, we don't want anything to do with these enterprises. And we can't fix our country, our economy, ourselves, or anything else by being involved in politics. We have to reject politics, we have to reject the state, and we have to refuse to give our consent, which is a very, very important thing if we're going to ever reform anything, our own personal consent, and then hope that we can influence others to refuse to give their consent, to reject the devil and all his works, as prayer says.
You know, I have often stated that the most dangerous thing that could happen in the United States is if we really start losing our freedom of speech. And I know you've been following this Brandon Raub thing where he was taken by local police with the Secret Service and the FBI there.
I've always thought, as I'm sure you have, that as long as we had our freedom of speech, things weren't over.
Right.
But our freedom of speech has been under attack for quite a long time. I mean, take, for example, the fact that a business owner can face extremely heavy fines, maybe business-destroying fines, because some employee of his told a dirty joke in front of a female employee.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
right.
That's bad manners, shouldn't be happening, but, freedom of speech, of course, does not apply there. Freedom of speech doesn't apply to businesses, period. So already there are huge impositions on what ought to be the absolute freedom of speech. And, of course, they are crack. We know that they're spying on Facebook, as, of course, poor Brandon Raub was seized in a Soviet manner. Soviets, of course, pioneered the use of psychiatric care for political dissidents. Dr. Thomas Saz would argue that psychiatry has always been used for that purpose, that it's always been a branch of the state used to suppress dissent and to get rid of people who are inconvenient to the regime or to the power elite. So here's just another example of it, that these people can declare there's something wrong with you because they don't like what you wrote and seize you. No trial. You're not allowed to have a lawyer. And when he got a lawyer, all of a sudden they're transferring him from the local psycho ward 3 hours away to a VA hospital, a federal facility, which of course is even worse. If people listening haven't read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey about government psychiatric care, it's a great book to read, especially in these days. So I guess this is, in cahoots with Big Pharma, too, because they'd like to have us all on their drugs. We have various serious proposals to put psychoactive drugs, lithium, for example, into the water supply, building on their mandatory medication of using industrial waste in the case of fluoride, which does a lot of damage to the people who are forced to drink it. So, because the government has no problem forcibly medicating us, and now it's quite astounding that they feel able to pull off something like this. And as far as I can tell, there's very little dissent. Libertarians are talking about it. You've done a great service in talking about it. The Rutherford Institute, which is not a libertarian organization, but is very civil liberties oriented for a Christian right operation, provided him a lawyer. And the minute they did that, they transferred him 3 hours away. And it doesn't do you any good to have been a soldier or a Marine in this guy's case. In fact, if we look at some of the stuff that's come out of the Department of Homeland Security, they say that they're especially looking for ex-soldiers as potential terrorists. Libertarians, too, Ron Paulians. I mean, we've all been named in these documents by consultants to Southern Poverty Law Center and all the other places that get vast dough consulting for the government and targeting people and acting as private spy and control agencies. So we've got our work cut out for us. I'd like to think that there's been, for example, a tremendous response on Facebook itself to this kidnapping and imprisonment of Mr. Raub. So I hope people get stirred up more. I hope they shout, and I hope they exercise their own freedom of speech, because they can't actually put us all away. As Étienne de la Boétie, the great French political thinker of the 16th century, that Murray Rothbard brought back, pointed out, of course, the rulers are always a tiny minority as compared to the ruled. And if we actually don't have to let them get away with things. That if anybody just puts Boétie, Boetie, and Rothbard into LewRockwell.com, the Google search engine there, you'll come up with de la Boétie's magnificent essay, which could be written today, on discourse on voluntary servitude. Because he says the political theorists of the time, and I guess maybe all time, are constantly focused on how do they make sure that everybody believes in and obeys the king, the government. But he says, to him the question is, why the heck does anybody? what is in it for anybody to do it? So Murray Rothbard's long introduction to that monograph, which is one of the great things Murray ever wrote. To me, it's like the blueprint for how we can actually overthrow a tyrannical government without violence. We don't need violence. We can't. Of course, violence is the government's weapon. It's the one with the death squads and the armies and the atomic bombs and so forth. We don't. I think it's morally and from a utilitarian standpoint, this is not something for us to use. But there are other methods, and de Libertari's essay is one great clarion call for a nonviolent way to get rid of a tyrannical government. Maybe that's I'm repeating myself, a tyrannical government, because government itself is tyrannical.
I think one of the things you've done, Lew, that is very important is keeping the writings of Murray Rothbard alive. Now, you knew Murray personally. How did you get to know him, and what was he like?
Well, I got to know him first because publishing house I worked for, Arlington House Publishers, which under the aegis of a great businessman, a great editor, a great entrepreneur, Neil McCaffrey, the late Neil McCaffrey. And this was the publisher also of Mises. It's how I got to be Mises's editorial assistant at the age of 24. So a very great thing, right? and so I knew Murray a little bit because he published Conceived in Liberty. I didn't have the honor to be his editor at that point. But then I got to know him much better in the later 70s and early 80s. And when I started the Mises Institute, the first person whose permission I asked was Margaret von Mises, Mises's widow. And then the second person I asked was Murray, and asked if he'd be in charge of academic affairs. And of course, the Institute at that time was just a letterhead, right? But Murray was extremely enthusiastic. He actually clapped his hands with glee. I mean, that was the kind of guy he was. The idea that there would be an institute devoted to the work and to the person of his great teacher. So, what can I say about Murray? Besides being, of course, a world historic genius, he was a great guy. When I knew Mises, even though he was probably slightly past his high point, went a little bit in decline, but still extremely beautiful manners, beautifully dressed, extremely dignified, very well spoken. I mean, Murray said to somebody who was clearly a representative of an older and better age. So that was Mises. But I I knew Margaret von Mises much better. I didn't really know Mises much at all, except to have met him and talked to him on the phone and corresponded with him. Murray I knew very, very well, and there's nobody who's in my experience, a greater guy. I mean, nobody you'd rather have a drink with, nobody you'd rather talk with. Whenever he was in the room, he was just immediately surrounded, and one reason was he was so hilarious. He was like a stand-up comic. I mean, you weren't in his presence for more than 2 or 3 minutes before you were laughing out loud. I mean, he was just so funny.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to meet him only 2 or 3 times, but it's really hard to describe Murray Rothbard because there's really no one you can point to and say, well, he's sort of like this guy or like that guy. I mean, he was a very, very unique individual, obviously very sharp, but had insights on almost everything going on in the world at a time and sort of put it in a humorous way on top of it. I mean, it was just an incredible guy that way.
Well, I remember talking to a young man who was a Cambodian expert for one of the think tanks in Washington, D.C., and had ridden in a cab to an Institute event with Murray. And when Murray found out what he did, he said later, that cab ride, he felt like his brain had been vacuumed. He said because it turned out that Murray knew everything about Cambodia and, of course, wanted to know everything more that he could find out. And Yuri Maltsev, economics professor today, and at that point was a defector from Russia, when Murray was talking to him, he said it turned out that Murray knew far more about Russian economics than he did, and knew all kinds of early proto-free market people and who were Russian economists that Yuri never heard of. So, or if we're talking about, say, ethnic clashes, and I remember once this coming up when the clash of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, long before, when these were all still parts of the Soviet Union, and he knew everything about every group, who they were allied with, the language issues, the cultural issues, of course, the political issues. Also, he was a huge sports fan, so when the Olympics came up, not only did he watch in the Olympics, and he loves, of course, certain sports more than others, but he knew who were the record holders. He knew all about the previous athletes who'd done well in that particular sport. He knew the history of the sport. He was like an expert on the Olympics, and he was a big college basketball fan. He knew everything about college basketball. I mean, he could have been a professional basketball broadcaster or something. I mean, he had that kind of knowledge, and he knew you couldn't believe. Also combined with a certain humility. I mean, he was not the kind of guy like some people who go around saying, "Let me show you how smart I am." He never. He was never like that, and he was always interested in finding a spark of something worthwhile in the other person and fanning that spark. He was always looking for anybody who might be a contributor to the cause of liberty. Of course, like you, I've never known anything to approach him.
Yeah, and on top of that, his knowledge of politics was incredible, and his enjoyment of politics, even though he's pretty much anti all politics.
He loved politics, and if you were with him on, which only happened to me once, I would always talk to him on the phone, but on election night, he'd have one of his long yellow legal pads, typical of him, filled with notes, and he knew everything. He knew who were the candidates in a particular congressional district, what the issues were, who was likely going to win. He knew in the Senate races, the gubernatorial races, of course, the presidential stuff. He knew everything. You look at his books, how did he know all this? Tom Woods recently pointed out when he looked at the Conceived in Liberty, he said this is an area of specialty for him, Tom Woods, and he's looking at these books and he's like, how did Rothbard find out about all this stuff I've never heard of?
And if you look at his books, you wonder, how did somebody have time to grasp the knowledge to write all these? It seems like he's enjoying himself, watching politics and sports and all that kind of thing. Maybe you can tell me if this is true or not. There was a soap opera he used to watch in the middle of the day or something like that.
He loved soap operas, and was it As the World Turns? I can't remember now which one it was.
Right.
But that was his relaxation. Of course, politics were his relaxation, and some people said that the Koch people, especially, dismissed all and said, "Well, he's not really a scholar." Yet he worked, of course, a very disciplined day. He wrote many hours a day, read many hours a day. Thought many hours. I mean, he was so he had the kind of mind. I don't know what was it about his IQ, been 200 or 220 or something. He had the ability to just know. He's like a universal genius. We were very lucky to have him.
Now, I read somewhere that you would wake up in the morning. This is pre-internet, where you would go to your fax machine and you would get pages and pages of comments and writing from us?
Yeah, this is of course in addition to all his scholarly writing, his teaching, his reading, and all his hobbies and so forth. He wrote a huge amount for the newsletter that he and I did, and so I would just pop out of bed to go see what was in the fax machine, and there would be a 20 or 25 page article on something that he'd written overnight, and of course just fascinating, and a lot of these are collected in the book called The Irrepressible Rothbard. And The Irrepressible Rothbard, which is a big, thick book of about 500 pages, and it's less than a quarter of what he wrote for this newsletter. This was just one outlet at one small time in his life. So if we were ever to do a collected works of Rothbard, take up some gigantic room in a library, there's no telling how many thousands and thousands of articles he wrote. That's including, and then of course books, chapters in books, essays.
And then, of course, there's personal correspondences, which apparently, he would go on from time to time. Robert Higgs talks about how he commented on one of his papers and would go on for pages and pages.
I think this is such a great story, and it says a lot about the greatness of Robert Higgs as well as about the greatness of Murray Rothbard, that when Bob sent him the manuscript for what became Crisis in Leviathan, that Murray sent him back, I believe it was a 22-page single-spaced letter, loving the book and saying, "Hey, Bob, you might want to look into these things." And the typical academic's response to this is, "Well, how dare, Bob's response was, "Holy smokes," and he took a year to go through all the stuff read everything Murray had recommended and redid his book in light of it. Wow. But Murray had that kind of ability, and if you look at the memos that he did for the Volcker Fund, a libertarian foundation that he worked for when he couldn't get a job before and after getting his PhD. He did these fantastic memos for them on books and important journal articles and so forth that are just extraordinary. And also, David Gordon is going to be doing an edited version of his correspondence. One of the great letter writers ever. I mean, when you see his letters, he should be famous just for the letters he wrote. Forget everything else. So he wrote thousands and thousands of letters. They're so interesting, so full of fascinating stuff, fascinating analysis, funny. So that's I don't know quite how many volumes there are potentially of letters, but David's working on that's going to be another great piece of Rothbardiana.
You know, on those memos, his incredible knowledge, the spectrum was in reading those was awesome in the David Gordon edited book that came out.
No, of course it's Murray being the great scholar he was, this is the ideal when you've got somebody like this, kept everything. So we've got, for example, in our archives, the papers he wrote in the 4th grade. And when you read his schoolwork, even in grammar school, it's recognizably Murray Rothbard. Now, how is that? Really? I don't know. But I mean, we've got it's quite something. I remember an old friend of his, Bill White, who had known him in grammar school, telling me that his mother coming home from school one day and saying, "Why can't you be like that Murray Rothbard? You know, I got scolded by the principal because of XYZ." And he said, Murray Rothbard, he said, in my entire career, he said, I've never encountered a student like this. And this is, again, in grammar school. So I think Murray was clearly something very unusual right away. And his parents realized it, and they took him out of public school and put him into private school, which is where Bill White was in school, too. You know, he was magical and so sweet. Wow. I mean, such a sweet guy, too. I mean, right. Not envious, not arrogant, but on the other hand, entirely stuck on principle. I mean, when it's a matter of principle of right and wrong, he was immovable. On the other hand, he learned, right? He changed his mind sometimes, so he wasn't a stick in the mud. But he nobody liked him, and of course, I think it's so interesting. And Tom Woods gave a recent wonderful talk on this at Mises University about all the people who hate Rothbard, because of course there's all the people who are either on the Koch payroll or who would like to be on the Koch payroll. Part of the oath you have to swear is you have to hate the guts of Murray Rothbard and diminish him. Now, of course, there was a time when they, for example, in the seminars at the Cato Institute, when there would be like a lecture on pay no attention to Rothbard. They got away with this for a time just because people admire power and money or are in awe of it. Then along comes the internet. And, of course, students tend to have a subversive streak in them anyway. So if anybody's told, don't read Rothbard, well, what's the first thing the kid does when he gets back to his room, right? And, of course, you only have to, we try to have all of Murray's books and scholarly papers. We want to have eventually everything up there, his letters and all that. And you only have to read Rothbard to be pulled into him, because he had to, in addition to everything else about him, he was just an extraordinary writer. I mean, he was just so clear, so interesting, so persuasive and elegant and eloquent. I mean, just nobody like him, certainly not in economics. Milton Friedman was pretty good in his Newsweek columns, but Henry Hazlitt, of course, was magnificent. But Rothbard, there's a reason that Rothbard is so much a bigger figure today than when he was alive, because everything's up on the internet for free. People can read it, be influenced by it, are being influenced by it. So even though you have powerful figures saying, pay no attention to this guy, he's awful, he didn't like Charles Koch or whatever the other charges are, they can judge for themselves. Mm-hmm. By the way, right. You had a neat idea, as did I, about Bill Koch, the former America's Cup racer and a sportsman, a very interesting guy, who's not political, and who built a Wild West town out in Colorado, an entire town, 55 buildings, and entirely for his family and his friends, and to house his magnificent museum-quality collection of Western memorabilia, Wyatt Earp's gun and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, and I think you made a similar comment, what a great way for a billionaire to spend his money rather than trying to run the rest of us through the government, just to create something magnificent like this and enjoy it. And by the way, Murray liked Bill Koch very much, and Bill Koch liked Murray Rothbard. So the whole family is not anti-Murray, just the political.
Okay, so we got a good picture of Murray Rothbard, the man. But Lew, why is he important? What will people get most out of his writings?
Well, look at Austrian economics. He actually improved on Mises. Of course, he stood on Mises' shoulders. He loved Mises. In fact, if he was talking at length about Mises, he often would choke up, right, even until the end of his life. Mises had that effect on people, and just another extraordinary, these two great economists of the 20th century. He would have been the last one to say, I improved on Mises. But in some small ways he did, and of course by systematizing Mises, so we look at man, economy, and state as versus human action, by systematizing him, made him much more accessible, but also in terms of monopoly and other areas, he actually improved on Mises, and he wanted to be improved on himself. I mean, and he didn't feel that he was the be-all and the end-all, that nobody is, and he was always trying to encourage younger people to write, to research. He would throw out idea after idea for dissertations, papers, and that sort of thing, as to ways to advance the Austrian school. So he had in his writing as well as his personal example, a big influence on the school, and I think his style was slightly different from Mises' style. Mises early on decided that he wasn't going to go after people personally, that he would just stick to the ideas. And that went along with his great dignified old world gentleman. It was Murray's view that it's important to not only show and expose economic error, but if people are ripping us off, to tell that in order to advance the cause, it was important that people realize they were being ripped off. It wasn't these things aren't just a matter of Romney being wrong in economics. He's actually a criminal, like all these guys.
Right.
So that's important. But I would say Murray's biggest influence, and of course he had a huge influence as an historian. His PhD dissertation on the Panic of 1819, later published, is still the key work, even recognized as such by the regular historians, the key work on that episode. His monetary history and so forth, his work on the Fed, I mean, just tremendously innovative to the extent we're all focused on the Fed. That's Murray Rothbard. Now, of course, Mises and the Theory of Money and Credit in 1912 was explaining what a central bank was and what it would result in. But Rothbard sort of put meat on the bones and talked about all the individuals involved and who was ripping who off and how it was happening and why these various guys were doing it and why, not only was John Maynard Keynes wrong in economics, he was a moral monster too. And Murray thought that sort of thing was important. But perhaps his greatest, at least as people would think it right now, his greatest contribution was to libertarianism. I mean, he really was the creator of modern libertarianism. What he did was he combined the libertarian tradition, which already existed in America and elsewhere, Tucker and Spooner and these guys, combined it with a natural law view of mankind and with anarchy. Before Rothbard, anarchism, even by the people who would be called libertarian anarchists of the 19th century, they had serious problems in economics and many other areas. So what Murray did was combine Austrian economics and anarchy and natural law based on Aristotle and Aquinas into current libertarianism. And it is the most powerful political philosophy, because I happen to think it's the correct political philosophy too, but it's just extremely powerful in its ability to convince. And we're noticing this especially among the young now that Rothbard is available for free everywhere on the web. And also Ron Paul, of course, has had a huge effect. Ron's revolution is in a sense a Rothbardian revolution. So what Murray did with libertarianism that I would say is having the biggest impact right now and will continue to have it. And it's what the state fears the most. And you only have to read Rothbard's, as I mentioned, if you look at his total works, you could spend decades reading and trying to absorb them. A great project, by the way. But just reading, for example, Murray's essay on the anatomy of the state, you will never be the same again. And this is based on his own construct of libertarianism. And there's also my other favorite essay of his, and there are many, many that would go in this category, but War, Peace, and the State. So if you understand these key issues, what is the state? How does it come to exist? Why it needs to be gotten rid of? But you read that article, you will never see anything the government does the same again. I mean, it's definitely the, taking the right colored pill. It's the scales drop from your eyes. And you're just by reading and absorbing that one essay, and is beautifully written, of course, and it draws you right in. You don't have to make yourself read it. Once you start, you're sorry when you finish. I think that's the power of Rothbard. And it's funny, somebody had written to me about, actually had written an article in the New York Times, a Cato guy, about, thank goodness, Rothbard is pretty much dead and gone. Although the unfortunate thing about the Ron Paul movement is it's having an effect of bringing Rothbard back. So we need to get rid of that, and we need to just concentrate on Friedman. And so in my response, I said, well, I knew Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was a brilliant guy, but he was also a Republican economist. He was always promoting, whether it's Nixon or Reagan or Bush or whatever. He was connected. Of course, he advocated things like income tax withholding and negative income tax and school vouchers and many, many state-building programs. But I said, outside of neoclassical economics and academic economics, Milton Friedman is a tiny figure today compared to Rothbard. First of all, his academic writing is nothing like Rothbard's. He was also wrong, and it's unpersuasive. So somebody in attacking me said, look, I was really making an unfair comparison because Friedman's books were all very expensive, whereas Rothbard's books were all free on the web. So it was unfair of me to make, but of course that's because they are free on the web, and we make them available to everybody, all his articles, everything of Rothbard. He's conquering. So I miss him every day. I wish to goodness he were here. Wouldn't he be loving the Ron Paul campaign, Romney, Obama? He'd be writing a wonderful essay this time, maybe email it to me rather than fax it, every day on all the goings on. And he would be, for example, the best known anti-war figure in the world. Just one of the things that would have happened, because he was the great libertarian anti-war person and bent the Libertarian Party to his will with a Rothbardian platform, which unfortunately they got rid of because they didn't like the fact that it was against the CIA and against the empire and against war and similar beloved pieties of the Republicans.
Lew, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. This is great stuff we've been discussing. And ladies and gentlemen, the greatest libertarian entrepreneur of all time, Lew Rockwell. Lew, thank you very much for taking the time out and talking about Murray and other topics. I appreciate it.
Bob, an honor to be on your show.
Check out Lew Rockwell's website at lewrockwell.com. That's LEWRockwell.com, where Lew brings the Rothbardian spirit to us every day with links to commentaries on current events from a libertarian perspective.
Alrighty, thanks everyone for listening. This is Robert Wenzel. Be sure to check out my website, economicpolicyjournal.com. I write there, post blogs every day, all day long, 7 days a week, so there's always something new about the economy, about liberty, politics, and whatever else comes to mind. That's economicpolicyjournal.com. Special shout out to Chris Rossini, who is the executive producer, and also to John Dalbert, who is head of editing and mastering. Thanks very much for listening.